Can I beat a hardcore Nuzlocke of Pokemon Fire Red without ever using a Pokemon Center or any healing items whatsoever? Well, that's what we're here to find out. You read the title of the video. Just like when I did this challenge in Pokemon Emerald, my choice of starter is absolutely critical, and I again go with the Grass-type starters since they usually get a range of self-healing moves, which are my only way to restore HP. Unfortunately, where Trico gets Absorb, Bulbasaur only gets Leech Seed, so this is going to be much harder. Thankfully, our Bulbasaur looks up to the challenge as he squares off against our rival BCBS's Charmander in the very first battle of the playthrough. Taking damage here doesn't matter since we automatically get fully healed afterwards, but winning is still a must. Even if Nuzlocks don't traditionally start until receiving Pokeballs, I'm not gonna do this journey with a loser. And back-to-back critical hits prove that Washington is anything but. Sorry, Chumpmander. With our sassy starter obtained, the challenge has officially begun, and it's off to Route 1, where I encounter a Rattata who I name Adams. Both teammates are at full HP as we arrive in Viridian City, where I immediately beeline to Route 22 in the hopes of catching a Spearow. Frustratingly though, our encounter is a monkey, and herein lies the first major problem with the challenge, namely finding a way to level up my Pokemon without taking damage. Even on Route 1, Jefferson the monkey is far too weak to quickly net KOs, and barring tremendous luck, getting hit by an attacking move is inevitable. We could completely avoid damage by fighting Pokemon who don't have attacking moves, like the Kakuna and Metapod in Viridian Forest, but in place of attacking moves, they have Harden, which means that I'll need to use several hits to take them out. And in this challenge, I just don't have the power points to do that, because just like my health points, once my power points are gone, there's no getting them back. This is why we needed Spearow from Route 22, because with immediate access to Peck, those little brown birds are the only way to quickly take out the denizens of Viridian Forest and get enough XP to progress through the game. Since this is a Nuzlocke though, and I can only catch the first Pokemon I find on each route, I've got no choice but to start over and hope to pull Spearow on attempt 2. And remember how in attempt 1, Washington absolutely crushed Charmander like the bald baby he is? Well, turns out that was a bit of an anomaly, because I proceed to lose the next 3 attempts before even leaving Professor Oak's lab. But on attempt 5, Georgie is once again victorious, and we're free to once again make our way to Viridian City. On the way though, I again encounter a Rattata, and this time catching him goes extremely poorly. This stupid rodent manages to break out of 3 Pokeballs and nail Washington with 2 tail whips, followed by a critical hit tackle. Given that every tick of HP is important, especially at this point in the game, that's cause for an immediate reset. On attempt 8, my Route 1 encounter is a Pidgey, and before throwing my first Pokeball, I elect to deal some damage with Tackle. The result is a successful 1-ball HG capture at the expense of just 3 hit points on Washington. Now Pidgey, or rather Adams, did take a sizable chunk of damage from the catching process, but just like in my previous no healing video, I'll be immediately putting every Pokemon I catch into the box as if my party is completely full. This automatically heals them, acting as a soft reset so that every Pokemon joins the team fresh. But as soon as a Pokemon loses a single hit point or power point, they can't go back into the box since that would then count as healing. Anyways, my encounter on Route 22 is again a Rattata, so it's time for another reset. And it's around here where I come to a sobering realization, like learning how much a lamp costs. On Route 22, Spearow's encounter rate is a measly 10%. Getting the Rattata dupe on Route 1 bumps that percentage up to roughly 18%, but when combined with the fact that a ton of attempts end with Washington just getting killed in his very first fight, this is starting to feel pretty hopeless. On attempt 13, I again pull Rattata. On attempt 17, I've got the Route 1 Rattata dupe, but still I pull Monkey. I could keep doing this forever, but by the time I get to attempt 20, I decide that I've had enough, and after reluctantly catching Jefferson the monkey, I make my way to Viridian Forest. Who knows, once Washington gets to level 7 and learns Leech Seed, maybe, just maybe, this team can put something together. But I'll never find out, because in trying to catch my Viridian Forest encounter, a particularly elusive and sadistic Weedle, Jefferson gets nailed by a single poison sting that instantly causes a permanent poison, resulting in yet another immediate reset. It's at this point that I'm starting to doubt the validity of this entire challenge and the life choices that led me to this particular moment. But at my absolute lowest, it finally happens. I pull the freaking Spearow, baby. It costs a bit of Adam's HP, but with a single ball, the ferruginous flyer is ours, and for the very first time, we have a chance. Now, Jefferson unfortunately has a modest nature, which lowers his attack, making him a little less useful than I was hoping, but the end result is the same. After catching Monroe the Caterpie from Route 2, we head to Viridian Forest and start terrorizing the local wildlife. A matchup against a Caterpie reveals that Jefferson is still too weak to safely fight them, so I decide to instead stick to the helpless Metapods and Kakunas. Some switching to Washington ensures that I don't burn too many Peck PPs on each Pokemon, and also grants the added benefit of leveling up my starter. At level 7, he gets the prophesized Leech Seed, which will be useful later, but for now, we just keep whittling away at bug types for valuable XP. By the time we get to Viridian Forest's sole mandatory trainer, Bug Catcher Charlie, Washington is at the cusp of level 10. Charlie has just one single Pokemon, but it's a level 9 Weedle, and since he knows Poison Sting, I can't bring in Jefferson for Pecks unless I'm confident he one-shots, which I am not. So all I can do is fire off tackles with Washington. We need all 5 of his remaining power points to take out Weedle, who generously spares our HP by simply spamming String Shot. That then gets Washington to level 10, where he finally learns Vine Whip, though tragically, it has a meager 10 PP. Still, we've made it to Pewter City, and without access to free healthcare, it's a straight shot to the first gym. I decide to fight the optional gym trainer to get some additional XP, and though his Geodude is no problem, his Sandshrew does survive a Vine Whip, resulting in some unexpected damage from Scratch and an extra power point gone. That does get Washington to level 12 though, which is more than enough to deal with Brock. His Geodude again falls to a single Vine Whip before doing anything. Onix is faster, but just misses a bind, classic Onix behavior, so with one last Vine Whip, the first gym badge is ours. Here's how the team's looking as we embark on the next chapter of our journey, and what awaits us is really rough. Route 3 has, fittingly, 3 mandatory fights, and virtually every single Pokemon I have to face here resists Grass-type moves, but many of them also threaten permanent poisons, which makes using Pokemon that aren't Washington extremely risky. Though, because of limited PP, there's no way Washington can handle this all on his own, but also Jefferson is really underleveled. Figuring out the optimal way to beat this gauntlet is a must, and this challenge, more so than any other, has so many factors to consider. And here's another one to consider because this video is sponsored by Factor. I figured that Garchomp FJ would have something to say about that. Where is he? Okay, well, Factor is a prepared meal delivery service that brings fresh, never frozen, dietitian-approved meals directly to your doorstep. With Factor, you can take the stress out of meal planning by choosing from over 35 meals per week across a range of dietary options. Personally, I love that Factor's chef-prepared meals take just 2 minutes to make, and they're genuinely good. It's a way for me to have an actually satisfying meal without spending a lot of time or money, so that I have more of both to spend with Poppy. One of the meals I'm excited to try is this Indian butter tofu meal. Wait a minute. This is empty. I'm sorry, it was just too delicious! Factor is now owned by HelloFresh, and what's great is that Factor is flexible, so you can pause, change, or reschedule your order at any time, making it easy to switch brands based on your weekly needs. So if you'd like to consider Factor for yourself, call back! Head to factor75.com or click the link down below and use my code FLYGON50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders. That's code FLYGON50 at factor75.com for 50% off your first box and 20% off your next month of orders. Thanks so much to Factor for sponsoring this video. Now, let's get back to the challenge. The first of the mandatory Route 3 fights against bug catcher Colton is nothing short of a Titanic-level disaster. Jefferson doesn't even two-shot his lead Caterpie and takes a massive chunk of damage from Tackle. A lucky dodge from Tackle number 2 keeps us in the yellow as we get to level 8 when Caterpie falls. Weedle comes in next, and against him, Peck is a two-shot, but in between, we get nailed by a massive critical hit Poison Sting, bringing Jefferson down to just 2 HP. If If that had poisoned, it'd be the end of attempt 2 for sure. Instead, Jefferson is free to take the kill, but now I gotta switch to Washington to deal with Colton's final Pokemon. Washington eats another critical hit, which sucks, and not wanting to waste any of my 5 remaining Vine Whip power points, I decide to use Leech Seed and Growl to slowly claim victory. In the end, that gets Washington back to full HP, but with Jefferson just a light breeze away from meeting the Grim Reaper, I decide to head back to Viridian Forest, where I eventually encounter a level 6 Kakuna. By using another one of my 9 remaining Leech Seeds and then switching out into Jefferson, he too can get back some HP. This is a nifty trick to heal teammates that don't have their own self-healing moves, but I can only do it a few more times before Washington will run out of PP. Thankfully, the fight against bug catcher Greg goes much better. With a few more levels, Jefferson is able to take out his Weedle, Kakuna, and Caterpie without taking any more damage. As Metapod comes out, Jefferson only has 2 more power points of Peck left, so knowing that it's completely safe to do so, I bring Little Adams in to whittle away at the Metapod with tackles. Many turns later, our rat is victorious, and we're on to the final mandatory trainer of Route 3, Bug Catcher James. With his final 2 Pecks, Jefferson defeats the level 11 Caterpie, and then Adams once again comes in to take out the Metapod. So the Route 3 gauntlet has been defeated, and our reward is my Route 3 encounter, Madison the Pidgey, and my Mount Moon encounter, Jackson the Zubat. Now at this point, there's a few more mandatory trainers in the basement of Mount Moon to prepare for, and once again, many of them have Pokemon that resist Grass-type moves. So the first thing I do is pick up the TM for Bullet Seed, which gives Washington another 30 power points to work with. Then, by fighting Hiker Marcos, I get Washington to level 15, where he learns Poison Powder. This lets me return to Route 3 and fight Wild Jigglypuff. Since they don't have a way to deal damage, it's safe to hit them with Poison Powder and then switch between 2 Pokemon to rack up some more XP without wasting any of my damaging moves. Through this method, Madison learns Gust at level 9, Adam learns Quick Attack at level 7, and Washington grows to level 16 where he can evolve, though I do delay that for the time being. Anyways, now that Martha has Gust, I can go back to grinding XP from bug types, including those owned by a few bug catchers in Mount Moon for some bonus XP. I also try to tackle a Last that I thought had 2 grass types, but it ends up being the wrong trainer, and her Clefairy does some solid damage to my team before going down. The correct fight was Last Miriam, who provides another chunk of XP for Madison to get to the brink of evolution. With one final level against a Paris that was in the wrong place at the wrong time, Madison evolves and we now have a relatively powerful Pokemon that can hopefully help us sweep through the 2 mandatory trainers guarding our exit from Mount Moon. I do accidentally run into the spinning Rocket Grunt because I refuse to learn how to do the speedrunner thing, but thankfully Washington handles him without losing too much HP. Madison then solos the mandatory Rocket Grunt, luckily taking 0 damage thanks to some poor move choices from the small-time criminal. Super Nerd Miguel is a different story though, and probably the most dangerous trainer so far. His Grimer and Coughing both know poison gas, so I need to fight them with the pride of Mount Vernon. With Leech Seed, Sleep Powder, and Bullet Seed, my little dino comes out on top, also ultimately taking out Voltorb with a few more Bullet Seeds, but we used a lot of resources for that fight. Nevertheless, that's the final trainer in Mount Moon, and after picking up the Helix Fossil, obviously, we're free to make our way to Cerulean City, but once I leave Mount Moon, there's no going back. Cerulean City sits behind a one-way ledge, so before taking that literal leap, I use Mount Moon's population of sentient rocks to get Washington to level 20 where he learns Razor Leaf. And with that absolutely essential move obtained, I finally let him evolve into Ivysaur. This ensures we have a powerful grass-type move to face off against the second gym leader Misty. A few fights against her gym trainers get Washington to the level cap of 21, and then it's showtime. Misty leads Staryu, who immediately fires off a water pulse into Washington. Despite doing little damage, it does confuse, and since Washington hurts himself in confusion, things just got a bit tricky. I gotta switch out to shake off the status, and the result is that Jefferson has to die to a second water pulse, marking the first death of the run. Thanks for the help, buddy. We won't forget you. Washington comes back in, and after eating another water pulse that now generously does not confuse, our Razor Leaf gets a clean KO. That leaves Starmie, who has Swift for solid damage, though the upside is that we won't be getting confused. Still, since our Razor Leaf isn't going to get the one-shot, we're going to need to Okay, never mind. That high critical hit ratio is coming in clutch. Just like that, badge number 2 is ours. But the early game woes are nowhere near over, and this next stretch of the game is easily the hardest from a resource management perspective. Before heading to Vermilion City, we need to go to Bill's house on Route 25, which is guarded by no less than 11 mandatory trainers, starting first with another fight against our rival BCBS. Madison deals with the mirror lead, losing just 16 HP in the process. Our winged warrior then bests Rattata without any more HP loss, but the same cannot be said about BCBS's Charmander. A quick attack does solid damage, but since Charmander retaliates with a growl, our second one does notably less. His Ember then hits for 12 damage and no burn, but after our third quick attack, the little salamander is sitting in blaze range, resulting in a boosted 17 damage to my second strongest teammate. I'm pretty sure that another quick attack won't get the kill, so I make a sacrificial switch to Jackson. But after that, I can bring Madison back in, who no longer growled, can now safely get the KO. That just leaves BCBS with a level 16 Abra who only knows teleport, providing the perfect Leech Seed target. With repeated switches, the sleeping sack of nutrients gradually gains Washington and Madison some much needed free HP before we ultimately win the battle. The next 6 fights all take place on Nugget Bridge, and again, many of these trainers have Pokemon that resist grass-type moves and threaten with permanent poisons. Before that though, I head to Route 4 and catch Van Buren the Ekans, so as to have at least one more body to throw at this problem. Bugcatcher Kale has 4 Pokemon, the first 2 of which are killed by single gusts from Madison. Then I decide to switch out to Van Buren against Kale's 3rd Pokemon so as to save some PP. With Rap and Leer, our Serpent can slowly whittle away at both Metapod and his yellow counterpart until victory is ours. Last Alley's 3 Pokemon are quick work for Madison, and youngster Timmy's 2 are even quicker work for Washington thanks to a critical hit Razor Leaf against his Ekans. Last Relly's 2 Nidorans take a few more Razor Leafs from Washington, but fail to do any damage before the battle is over. Camper Ethan's Mankey falls victim to Madison's 30-second gust, meaning he's got just 3 more remaining. So the final member of the Nugget Bridge challenge is a disguised Rocket Grunt. His Ekans eats 2 more Razor Leafs from Washington, and his Zubat steals 2 quick attacks from Madison. But with that, we've made it to Route 25. Hiker Wayne only has a single Onix, who falls to a single Bullet Seed. Dodging youngster Dan means I don't have to worry about his Slowpoke, and I can instead focus on Picnic or Kelsey, who again has both forms of Nidorans. Not much to do here, but spam Razor Leaf, so by the time we win this fight, Washington's down to just 11 PP. Hiker Knob is next and has 4 Pokemon, but at the very least his Geodudes all fall to Bullet Seeds. His Machop does require another Razor Leaf though. So now there's just one more mandatory trainer, but before that, I do optionally decide to face off against Camper Flint. He's got just 2 Pokemon, both of which fall to a single Razor Leaf thanks to another critical hit, again against an Ekans. Those 2 power points are a phenomenal price to pay for early access to the secret power TM that's sitting above Camper Flint and his now murdered Pokemon, because that's 20 power points of a 70 base power move that we previously did not have and will be necessary for the next few splits. Anyways, the final trainer before Bill is Lass Haley, but Madison just uses 1 gust to kill the Oddish, 2 quick attacks to kill the Pidgey, and another gust to kill the backup Oddish. You always gotta have a backup Oddish. Never leave home without a backup Oddish. So now we've officially made it to Bill's house, and by helping him with his definitely not perverted experiment, we get the SS Ann ticket and our adventure through Kanto can continue. Unfortunately, there is one final Rocket Grunt before we say goodbye to Cerulean City. He's got a Machop, which is the recipient of Madison's final gust, though since that's not a KO, we get nailed by a nasty Karate Chop before taking the KO with one of our last dozen quick attacks. That unexpected damage is really not ideal because this Rocket Grunt still has a Drowsy, and having just taught Madison secret power, losing him here would be pretty rough. Fortunately, after we go for secret power, our foe opts for disable, meaning that with just 1 final quick attack, the Pudgy Psychic falls and Madison lives. At long last, I can access Route 5. Home to the saving grace of this run, the Daycare Center. The reason that this seemingly innocuous building is so important is that I can use it to freely level up Pokemon without using power points. Well, not freely, it actually quite literally costs money, but this is huge for safely getting my Pokemon to higher levels, though there are a few caveats. First is that Pokemon get healed in the Daycare Center, so much like the PC, I can only use the Daycare Center training on Pokemon that are at full HP and with full power points on all of their moves, meaning that Adams, Washington, Madison, and even Van Buren are a no-go. But Monroe the Caterpie, still sheltered from the horrors of combat, is fair game. Though the second caveat is that Pokemon do not evolve in the Daycare Center, so if I want to evolve them, I have to pull them out and level them up in battle. But in the case of Monroe, since I want to put him back in after he evolves into Metapod, I have to make sure to do this in a way where he doesn't take damage or lose PP. The safest way to do this is by fighting Kakunas and Metapods on Route 24, though actually in the process I encounter an Abra, and since he was our first non-duplicate, and I'm the infamous Dr. Wumball HG, Tyler joins the team. Anyways, once I find a Kakuna, I can switch in Monroe, switch out into Madison, and then take the kill with Secret Power, granting Monroe the final XP needed to evolve. Repeating this process again fully evolves him into Butterfree, and then with one last stretch in the daycare, we can bring him up to a respectable level. Though that does bring up the final caveat involved in daycare training, which is that your Pokemon will learn new moves as they level up, deleting their old moves in the process, starting with the move in the first slot. So if you want to keep certain moves, you need to routinely cycle them around as the Pokemon level up. But even with all of these caveats, this is a game-changing resource that I'll be using for the rest of the playthrough. Moving along, in the grass on Route 5, I catch an Oddish named Harrison, on Route 25 I catch a Weedle named Polk, and on Route 6 I catch a Meowth named Taylor. All of these guys are eligible for daycare training, but in order to make room for them on the squad, I'll need to retire some of my current teammates. Putting Adams and Van Buren in the box isn't killing them per se, but because they get healed, it means I can't use them ever again. Hence, retirement. But with that, here's the new team. Washington and Madison are still around, as is the new and improved Monroe, and joining them are new additions Tyler, now a Kadabra, and Taylor. I've also been lugging around Jefferson's rotting carcass because by talking to this little girl in Vermilion City, I can trade our literal dead weight for her metaphorical dead weight. Though as terrible as Farfetch'd is, a Pokemon is a Pokemon, and Chading will have his role to play soon enough. Just east of Vermilion City is Diglett Cave, and go on, guess what I get? If you guessed Doug Trio to be cheeky, you'd be wrong. I did indeed get a Diglett, and that's a good thing because a Doug Trio would have really messed me up. And speaking of messing up, I messed up the recording for the SS and rival fight. Looks like I accidentally hit the recording button earlier so that when I went to start recording the battle, I actually ended the recording and then started it after it was over. Oopsies. The main takeaway is that Tyler is no longer tethered to the physical world after acting as a chew toy for BCBS's Raticate. It's tragic, yes, but life moves on, children rub the backs of old men, and soon enough, we find ourselves facing down Lieutenant Surge. This matchup lives and dies with Little Fillmore, who's playing a game of Magnitude Roulette against our foe's 3 electric types. Against Voltorb, Fillmore gets a Magnitude 9, 110 base power for what is probably a KO at least twice over. Against Pikachu, our luck continues with a Magnitude 8 for another clean KO, so all that's left is Raichu. Could it really be this easy? 3 up, 3 down? Nope, I guess not. Gotta love the 5% chance at getting a Magnitude 4 with 10 base power. Well, Fillmore, you just made this way harder for yourself. After a double team, we pull Magnitude 6 for 50 base power, which connects, but leaves Raichu with a Sliver, letting him get off a second double team. It also lets Lieutenant Surge heal with a Super Potion on the next turn, which is a huge problem given that our Magnitude 9 misses. A quick attack then hits us for 16 damage, and since we miss another Magnitude, it means that Fillmore's got one last chance to bring this home. Another quick attack brings Fillmore down to 12 HP, and then Fillmore pulls a Magnitude 7, which should be enough to KO, but does he connect? He does! And with that, Fillmore claims his final KO, completing the sweep of Lieutenant Surge and earning our campaign its 3rd gym badge. That puts us squarely in the mid-game, and though the road to Celadon City is long, it's not terribly difficult now that we have more than a few useful teammates. Even so, our journey is not entirely free from sorrow. On Route 9 against Bugcatcher Connor's Venonat, Monroe gets inflicted by a nasty poison, marking him for dead. My hope is that he'll be able to help us catch a Voltorb on Route 10 before his passing, but sadly, even after getting put to sleep, the Voltorb breaks out of their would-be Pokeball, and so Monroe falls before completing his final task. And it's not just him, because somehow this Voltorb breaks out of 2 more Pokeballs and kills Taylor. I swear catching stuff in Fire Red and Leaf Green is way harder than in other games or something. Eventually, Pierce the Voltorb acquiesces, but losing 2, or like 1.5 Pokemon to get them feels pretty bad. Buchanan the Geodude is our encounter from Rock Tunnel, and with the help of Harrison the Gloom, we make it through the various mandatory fights that separate us from Lavender Town, though again, we don't make it there completely unscathed. Half the team's pretty banged up, Harrison's been permanently paralyzed, and Buchanan's been put to sleep, though at the very least that last one is easily reversible. What isn't reversible is a burn from the Vulpix wielded by the only mandatory trainer before Celadon City, Gambler Rich. But that's not even the most tragic result from this fight, because just a few turns before Vulpix left Buchanan for dead, Gambler Rich's Growlithe dealt the finishing blow to sweet little Fillmore. So by the time we've crawled our way to the bustling city of Celadon, we're at 6 deaths and the team's looking rough. Fortunately, this city's got some valuable resources, like the department store where I can buy additional secret power TMs. I also snagged the gift Eevee and name him Johnson, and now that I finally have access to Great Balls, I catch a Growlithe named Lincoln from Route 8 and a Drowsy named Grant from Route 11. But for now, they too go to the box. Instead, I bring Chiding onto the team to replace our most recently fallen soldier. His job will be to deal with Erica's grass types, along with Harrison, who I promptly evolve into Vileplume. There's a ton of potential gym trainers to deal with, but the quickest route to Erica is to go through the left side, which features just 2 battles with a total of 3 Pokemon, and when it's all said and done, here's how we're looking. Not exactly the healthiest, but as long as Chiding does his job, this should be fine. Erica leads with Victory Bell, and immediately I'm disappointed to see that Chiding's Fly doesn't one-shot, resulting in a nasty stun spore. So I decide to switch to Harrison as Erica heals. We do a bit of damage with a few acids before ultimately putting our foe to sleep, and then switching back to Chiding. Victory Bell gets an immediate wake-up, so she hits an acid before we have the chance to fly up and take the kill on the following turn. I'll admit it, I definitely could have played that much better. Fortunately, Tangela is pretty unthreatening and falls to a few hits after doing just 2 damage with Constrict. So last is Vileplume, and sadly, there's very little chance Chiding makes it out of this alive, though he does tank an acid before successfully flying into the sky. A stick-boosted critical hit will save his life, but it's just not in the cards. Honestly, it's already a small miracle that Chiding made it as far as he did without getting fully paralyzed even a single time. While this may not be the outcome he was hoping for, as far as using a Farfetch goes, this is absolutely a win. Because with Vileplume in the red, Madison is free to come in and take the kill with a secret power. Though honestly, with the level difference, I'm not sure if we get the KO without that critical hit, but that's par for the course with Madison. This crazy bastard refuses to die. Like in Rock Tunnel against Picnicker Martha, Madison was up against her Oddish with 15 HP, and the Mad Lad managed to get a double secret power flinch to KO the Sproutling without taking any damage. And then after that, against Martha's Bulbasaur, he scores another flinch to 2-shot him without taking any damage either. All this to say that Madison is either the hardest working Pidgeotto in Kanto, or he's the avian incarnate of RNGesus himself. Either way, that's badge number 4. RIP Chiding. Now that leads us to the largest individual split of the game. Gyms 5 through 8 can all be tackled in pretty quick succession, but the gap between Gyms 4 and 5 is massive, represented best by the huge jump in the level cap. We've got a lot of mandatory fights to clear through, but the good news is that we can heavily use that new level cap to our advantage. On Route 12, I fish up a Magikarp named Haze, and with some excessive daycare training, he evolves into an extremely powerful Gyarados, who I use to plow through the mandatory fights in Rocket Hideout and Pokemon Tower. Though despite Haze's unparalleled power, this doesn't all go flawlessly. For example, against my rival BCBS's Gyarados, I have to sacrifice Buchanan for the free switch to Pierce, who I've also grossly overleveled. And then against a Rocket Grunt's Coughing in Pokemon Tower, we miss out on the one-shot with Haze and get nailed by a smokescreen, causing our subsequent secret power to miss and giving our enemy the chance to blow himself to smithereens. Nevertheless, all of my Pokemon, except Buchanan, RIP, are still kicking by the time we've saved Mount Fuji and obtained the Pokeflute. I also snagged Garfield the Ghastly, who evolves into Haunter and serves as the perfect Pokemon to help me catch the Snorlax on Route 16. I shouldn't need to tell you that Snorlax is an extremely useful Pokemon to have, especially with access to the move Rest. Unfortunately, these slumbering giants can be pretty tricky to catch and threaten with massive damage as you attempt to hurl ball after ball at their lethargic bodies. But with Garfield's ghost typing, Snorlax can't do a damn thing. And by using Confuse Ray, we can even get him to hurt himself in confusion and eventually put himself to sleep with Rest. It does take more than a dozen balls, but eventually Dr. Wumball HG pulls through like he always does, and Taft joins the squad. By expertly dodging the optionals on Cycling Road, we swiftly arrive in Fuchsia City, where the final oh-so-important resource awaits. In the house just west of the PokéCenter lies the Move Deleter, who aptly named will delete any move my Pokemon knows. This is huge, because it means that I can delete moves that have dropped to 0 PP, and if that move just so happens to be a purchasable TM or a reusable HM, I can then just relearn the move, thereby getting an unlimited amount of PP on moves like Secret Power, Surf, and Strength. Is it a bit of a loophole? Yes, but technically it's not healing my Pokemon. Similarly, since Garfield didn't take any damage against Snorlax, I can just delete Confuse Ray from her moveset and then drop her back in the box to make room for another teammate without having to send her into early retirement. Anyways, from here I catch a whole swath of new teammates, though only a few of them will be relevant. At this point, it's clear that my party is due for an update. We've got some pretty tough battles coming up, and in their current state, these guys just aren't up to snuff. At the very least, we'll need to level up a few new teammates. The problem is that I'm not exactly flushed with cash, and the daycare ain't exactly cheap. So we need to get some money, but we need to do it without losing HP and without wasting unrecoverable PP. I start by getting the Amulet coin from one of Professor Oak's aides. Then, with it attached, Washington and I use the Versus Seeker to fight my favorite trainers on Route 3. I had to be really careful to pick the right trainers for this, because they need to be weak enough that we guarantee one-shots, meaning that I had to avoid all the trainers that get stronger in rematches, and I also had to avoid Pokemon that have priority moves like Quick Attack or pesky abilities like Static and Effect Spore. Washington is a pretty good Pokemon for this mindless money farming, since he can learn both Secret Power and Strength, so that I don't have to fly to Fuchsia City and delete my moves quite as often. This farming also has the added benefit of gaining Washington some much needed effort values and levels. Pretty soon he evolves into Venusaur, which means that he's got enough power to graduate from the trainers on Route 3 to my favorite money farmer, Gamer Hugo. This poor sucker has a Poliwag, a Horsey, a crippling gambling addiction, and a seemingly bottomless trust fund that he has no problem forking over piece by piece. 2 hits are all it takes to earn 2,592 Poke, and we can fight this guy over and over and over again. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't take me too long to score 7 figures from Gamer Hugo, and with that, we've got more than enough money to pay the daycare man and purchase the TM for Shadow Ball. This'll go great on Grand Grant, who we just finished leveling up by defeating an army of Route 1 Pokemon for some much needed speed EVs. After all of this training, here's the new team. Washington and Madison were manually brought near the level cap, Pierce and Hayes remain on the team, ready to lay down their lives if needed, and the new additions are Grant the Hypno and Harrison the Seadra, replacing Garfield the Haunter, who's back in the box, and Harrison the Vileplume, who I only now realize has the same name as Seadra, but oh well. Regardless, she's enjoying early retirement after a relatively mediocre performance. But her performance doesn't hold a candle to the chandelier of mediocrity that is Grant the Hypno. Here I was thinking that this thing would be able to plow through Koga and Sabrina's gym all by herself. But by the time we get to Koga, she's taken so much damage from failing to one-shot Koga's gym trainers that we're only barely above 50%. Her psychic at least one-shots Coughing, but it comes nowhere close to one-shotting Muck, who gets off a sludge for massive damage and a poison. At the very least, Grant can finish off Muck and take the kill on Coughing number 2 before Poison seals her fate, but that means my team is left to face off against Koga's Wheezing without a super effective psychic type move. My best bet is Harrison, who can hit the tanky whoopee cushion with 2 surfs, taking only 1 sludge that generously does not poison in the process. So the battle is won, but regardless, I wasn't expecting a psychic type to be such a flop against the poison type gym. Well, whatever. With that death, we need to bring a new member onto the team. Ideally, one that doesn't suck, so by heading to Route 20, I catch Coolidge the Tentacool, who quickly evolves into Tentacruel and serves as our check against BCBS's Charizard as we face down against him at the Silphco. This fight is a pretty scary one, and there's a few problematic Pokemon. But with a Thunderbolt TM funded by Gamer Hugo, Pierce one-shots Pidgeot and Gyarados, though as Execute comes out third, his burn damage brings him just 1 tick away from death. He's still got utility though, so I just decide to hard switch to Madison on a Confusion. Then we take to the sky for a Fly, which surely one-shots Execute, right? Nope. Pidgeot is terrible, and the result is that Madison gets Stun Spored and then nailed by a critical hit before he can take the KO with a Wing Attack. But even at death's door, Madison should be able to handle BCBS's Alakazam since his only attacking move is Future Sight. And sure enough, 2 secret powers get the KO with a lucky paralysis ensuring we outspeed on the second turn. That just leaves Charizard, so in order to get the safe switch, it's time to sacrifice one of our nearly dead teammates, and I decide that Hayes is the appropriate martyr since his Intimidate at least reduces the damage of Charizard's wing attacks, granting Coolidge a much better matchup. She still takes damage from Alakazam's Future Sight on the switch for some reason, but given that we outspeed for almost a one-shot and our Clear Body stops Charizard's attempted Scary Face, Coolidge wins us the battle without losing any more HP. After that, we obtain the Lapra from the scared Silphco employee. Harding here will almost certainly be an Elite Four bring, and surprisingly, there's just a few more fights left before we get there. The first is the penultimate fight against Giovanni. So it's here where we finally say goodbye to Pierce as they do what they were born to do. Wait. What the hell, man? What are you doing? Pierce, you're an Electrode. You gotta blow up. Says who? Why can't you just retire me like Harrison? Wait, I don't get it. Don't you want to blow up? No! Why would I want to blow up? Because that's what all Electrodes do. Do you really think that? That an Electrode's only ambition in life is to blow up? My dad was a lawyer. My mom was a painter. Why are you doing this? Well, And you're really gonna have me blow up against a Nidorino? I'm burned, moron! It's not even gonna kill! Oh yeah, that's a good point. Well, nothing I can do about it now. With Pierce's beautiful sacrifice, Nidorino is at low enough HP for Coolidge to take the KO with a Bubble Beam. Garfield's rejoined the team to completely wall Kangaskhan and eventually get the KO with a few secret powers. Harrison comes in against Rhyhorn on a whiffed Rock Blast and Oko's with Surf before also KOing Nidoqueen with 2 more Surfs to win the battle. The next fight is against the 6th gym leader Sabrina, and with Grant long dead, I've got to bring out Taft. His special defense and access to Shadow Ball, which is physical in Generation 3, is enough to pretty easily slice through Sabrina's team like a quartet of perfectly cooked fish fillets. It's not completely damageless, but it's close enough. Given how tedious the early game was, I'm pleased to report that the late game is much quicker. It's a short trip to Cinnabar Island, where a swiftly leveled up Harrison surfs his way through Blaine's fire types for badge number 7, and then doubles back against Giovanni's ground types in Viridian City for badge number 8. So all of a sudden, we're just one mandatory battle away from the Pokemon League, and for the second to last time, it's a showdown against our rival BCBS. But with the jump in level cap, we can make this fight extremely simple. My lead is Truman the Electabuzz, a pickup from the power plant specifically for this fight so that we don't risk any would-be Elite Four teammates. Sadly, catching him did result in the death of Garfield, but it's what it's. Anyways, Truman can cleanly one-shot Pidgeot with a naturally learned Thunderbolt, Washington can take the KO on Rhyhorn with his third-to-last Razor Leaf, Taft bodies Alakazam, Harrison Ice Beams Execute, and then Truman comes back into Thunderbolt Gyarados and Charizard. Just like that, we've made it to the steps of the Indigo Plateau, which means that it's time to build out the final team of the playthrough. This starts by retiring Harrison, Coolidge, and Truman. Thank you all for your service. That lets me pick up Johnson the Jolteon, Harding the Lapra, and McKinley the Poliwag, but McKinley's not staying on the team for long because once he evolves into Poliwhirl, I head to Cerulean City and trade him away for a Jinx named Zinx? Anyways, with our usual methods, we're able to get our 3 new teammates into tip-top fighting shape, and eventually Washington learns Synthesis, which he can use to get back to full HP against a wild Kakuna. Candidly, Washington is not the best bring here. Venusaur matches up remarkably poorly into this Elite Four, but he's my starter and he's been with me for every step of this exceptionally difficult challenge, so it's only fair that he reaps the rewards of victory. Against the same Kakuna, I can also use Rest to bring Taft back to full HP, so with that, we've got 5 fully healthy teammates. But there's still one more pickup. Our current team doesn't have a great answer to BCBS's powerful Charizard, so in Cinnabar Island, I call on the help of Lord Helix himself. And with the power of science, Biden the Omanyte joins the squad and swiftly evolves into Omastar. Which means that after some final leveling up, Madison the Pidgey flies us back to the Pokemon League, marking an end to his extraordinary career. Despite his genetically based shortcomings, Madison always pulled through, and especially the stretch from Misty to Erica would not have been possible without his dedication and hard work. Rest well, my son. We'll see you on the other side. Here's the final team, all leveled up to level 60 to match Lance's Dragonite. This team is extremely powerful. Fire Red Nuzlocks are well known for granting exceptional guaranteed encounters, and I've got the best of the best on my roster. So without any further ado, let's see if they've got what it takes. Lorelei is first, and with the speedy power of Johnson the Jolteon's Thunderbolts, we can one-shot her first 3 Pokemon who all sport a secondary water typing. Lapra is fourth and also a water type, but happens to be bulky enough to survive the hit and retaliate with an Ice Beam for respectable damage. After some healing, we get the kill with a few more attacks, but that leaves Jinx. And not wanting to risk Johnson to a potential critical hit since we need him for the upcoming Gyarados, I decide to switch to Taft, who gets put to sleep. This next bit is cumbersome, but relatively safe, because with his thick fat ability, Taft is taking next to nothing from Jinx's Ice Punches, and even though we also have to deal with Infatuation, using Yawn and Rest eventually gets me in the position to take the KO on Jinx with Taft still at full HP. Pretty annoying, but in the end, we've defeated Lorelei at the expense of just a little bit of Johnson's HP. Lorelei's Jinx giving me the most trouble is ironic, given that it's our Jinx who trivializes the next 2 fights. Bruno's fighting types fall to a combination of Ice Punches and Psychics, whereas Agatha's poison types fall to just a few Psychics. So with those 2 quick and dirty sweeps, we arrive at the final member of the Elite Four, Lance. His lead Gyarados has a sign around his neck that says "Electrocute me," so Johnson gladly obliges. Dragonair number 1 grants a safe switch to Harding as he sets up a safeguard and then falls to an Ice Beam. That baits in Aerodactyl, but thanks to our Shell Armor ability, he's not all that threatening. An Ancient Power comes out, and doesn't get the Omni Boost, so one Surf is enough for the KO. That just leaves Dragonair number 2 and Dragonite number 1, which both fall to an Ice Beam apiece, winning us the final battle of the Elite Four. So all that's left is the ultimate showdown against my rival, the big bad BCBS. Like Lance, he leads with a flying type that's easy pickings for our speedy pup. That then brings in Rhydon, so I switch to Washington on a nasty Earthquake before retaliating with a Giga Drain for the clean KO and some free HP. Alakazam is third, so as usual, it's off to Taft. A Reflect on the switch, followed by a critical hit Psychic, means that we take a sizable chunk of damage before getting off our first Shadow Ball for roughly 70%. But again, we're so bulky that Taft is free to tank another Psychic and then get the KO on the following turn. That brings in Exeggutor though, definitely BCBS's most problematic Pokemon this side of Charizard. My only real answers are ice moves from Zinx and Harding, but I can't afford to switch Zinx in on an Egg Bomb, and I can't risk switching either of them in on a Sleep Powder. So I decide to just stay in, possibly risking Taft to a devastating attack from the giant palm tree. He outspeeds to go for Egg Bomb, but it misses, meaning that we get off a Shadow Ball for just a bit of damage through Reflect. So given that he's going for Egg Bomb, I assume that we can now get the safe switch to Harding. Unfortunately though, BCBS mixes it up and goes for Sleep Powder. But that misses too, meaning that Exeggutor has completely shit the bed, and we're free to take the KO with an Ice Beam. So Gyarados is 5th, and instead of switching to Johnson, Harding takes the KO himself with a Thunderbolt tech, leaving BCBS with nothing but his Charizard. Which means that it's time for our ringer. He's been biding his time for this exact moment. A Fire Blast hits old Joe for solid damage considering we've got a quad resistance, but there's nothing BCBS can do at this point. It's all Jover. Another Fire Blast connects for another chunk of damage, and then with a Mystic Water boosted Surf, Biden takes the clean KO, winning us not just the final battle against BCBS, but the entire run. Well, this challenge was pretty different from my other playthroughs. Unlike in regular hardcore Nuzlocks, the battles were pretty straightforward, and the real challenge came from resource management and saving certain Pokemon for specific threats. I tried to make this video a bit more technical than my more recent videos so that you could really understand the process of navigating through the various mandatory battles with limited HP and PP. Hopefully it was an interesting one because I had a lot of fun working it all out. As always, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, it'd be great if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Or don't, I don't know, but I do know that you should follow me on Twitch to keep up with streams of my current ROM hack challenges. Stay tuned for more Nuzlocke videos, and until then, remember to always, always, always play around the critical hit.